Hello and welcome to this commercial property podcast. I'm Amit Sharma and I'm a practicing commercial property solicitor. When we talk about commercial property, in some cases we're talking about a commercial lease. So its creation or its transfer from one party to another. So, what is a lease? In essence, a lease is just a contract, although it's a special contract because it will give the tenant the right of possession of the property. The aim of most commercial leases is to put most of the obligations onto the tenant, and the landlord, in most cases, is interested in just getting the rent and doing very little. So once your mind has been set that that is what the parties want, and you see that the leases are quite pro-landlord, it will become clear that if you're not taking legal advice when taking on a commercial lease, you could be entering into a very bad bargain. I'm very often asked by my prospective business clients, particularly new businesses, they ask, why do I need you? I can read the lease and I can read the title documents and all the other documents. I can probably understand it. Surely it's common sense, is it not? Certainly I will try and explain why it may not be so obvious. So before you take on a commercial property, and if it's something that you've never done before, I would probably suggest that you sit down with your business associates, fellow directors or partners, or your friends or your close family, and you may want to discuss the affordability of a commercial lease. Very often you're not just paying rent, you may have to pay VAT on top of the rent. You may need to pay a service charge in addition to the rent. You will probably have to pay a building insurance contribution on top of the rent, and then you've got the usual utilities on top of the rent, and then anything else that you may need to use a property for what you want. One thing I will make clear is that in commercial leases, and indeed in most business-to-business contracts, you are certainly much freer to agree things between yourselves than if it was a consumer contract. There are still a number of laws which will apply, and in the lease you'll have several different headings, and each one of those headings is going to have their own, usually quite a large area of case law about how particular clauses and provisions are going to be interpreted. So simply relying on the literal interpretation of a clause may not actually give the answer that you are looking for, or indeed wanting to have. So let's say you are happy to proceed and you want to take on a commercial lease. You found a property through an agent or privately. What should you do next? Now, I normally would say before you get a lawyer involved that you get a survey done from a specialist commercial property surveyor. If you're also buying a business, I suggest that you get a special business valuation done, and the more you pay is sort of reflective of the sort of evaluation that you may receive. It is usually wise to have a summary of agreed main terms between you and the landlord. So some of the things you may want to think about is put into a document known as the Heads of Terms, HOTS for short. And the common things which you may want to include are the amount of the starting rent, the length of the lease, whether you have rights to renew at the end of the lease, how much rent deposit you are required to pay, any details of break clauses, and these are clauses which allow either you or the landlord or both of you to terminate the lease early. You may want to agree the frequency of rent review, the details of any rent-free period, and if there's any repairs that the property needs, whether or not there's going to be a schedule of condition. You may also want to include a provision about legal costs, but in most cases, in the absence of agreement, the law confirms that each party is to pay their own legal costs. This is not an exhaustive list, and matters may be a little bit different for your transaction, but it is important to take time to understand the main provisions that you want to agree. Very often you may be asked to pay a premium or goodwill for the grant of a lease or a transfer of a lease. Now, this is quite subjective, it depends on the property. The example I normally give clients is that if you were looking for a property in Regent Street or Oxford Street, which is prime retail, and there are many parties who are sort of competing for the same space, then you may be required to pay a premium, amongst other things that may need to be done. These things are hard to quantify or value, and it's more of an art form in some cases rather than an exact science. We all know that what somebody is prepared to pay is very different to what the real value may be. One should also be mindful of the post-completion costs that may need to be paid. In some cases you may need to pay stamp duty, land tax on the lease, and in some cases you may also need to pay for land registration of your lease. Just a small point to note about the schedule of condition. This is a document which is normally a photographic schedule. In some cases it is prepared by surveyors. The purpose of the document is to show the condition of the property that you're about to rent, and it will be the agreed standard of repairs. So it may well be that there are some things that need further repair, and it may be that there is a minimum threshold that is required to be maintained. I would always advise that it's useful to have this agreed, as otherwise sometimes there can be disputes towards the end of the term about what sort of condition is required. So, thank you all for listening to this podcast. We hope you found it useful. If you would like to get in touch with myself, my telephone number is 07983 329 679. I'm more than happy to discuss costs and service options for any prospective clients. Once again, thank you for listening.